Which props should you bet this Sunday? What's going on, football fans and gridiron gamblers? It's Mitch back here with another week of NFL Best Bets. My favorite player props for week 4 of the 2024 NFL season. If that sounds good, Gronk spike the like button. Don't forget to subscribe for weekly NFL player prop picks just like this. In this video, I use my knowledge of the teams, the players, the schemes, and the matchups combined with the insights on Outlier to provide great player prop options for week 4. And we have close to 20 picks in this video for just Sunday's slate alone, guys. So let me know in the comments your thoughts on my picks, and let me know if you really love this weekly player prop video, because if you guys don't tell me, I don't know. So let me know in the comment section below, and let's get started, guys. Gronk spike the like and subscribe. Let's get started with the early slate, move our way to the afternoon slate. We're going to begin with one of the more interesting games on the slate from an offensive perspective, and that to me is one of the more defensive games. It's the Indianapolis Colts and the Pittsburgh Steelers. One of the players that I do like for the purposes of offense in this game is Najee Harris. I believe that Najee Harris could have a good game. If you think the Steelers will be close, if not win this game, I think their entire game plan offensively will be running the football. The Colts have been the worst rushing defense in football against the Texans, against the Packers. They improved against the Bears, but I thought a lot of that had to do with the Bears, which we'll talk about a little bit later as well. Spoiler alert. Najee Harris has exceeded 66.5 rushing yards in 4 of his last 5 games. This season, he's hit 69 yards against Denver, and he hit 70 yards against Atlanta. These 2 games were on the road. So the trend is on Outlier, 4 of his past 5 games on the road, and he's averaged 82 rushing yards per game in those last 5 games. So this game's in Indianapolis, perfect conditions, in a dome. That would typically lead to more passing, but given the weakness of the Colts, given the strength of what the Steelers want to do offensively, which is run the football, given how the Steelers have provided they're going to run the rock a lot with Najee, especially considering, if we go back to this trend right here, you can see that Jaylen Warren is out, updated 5 hours ago here on Friday, that Jaylen Warren will be out. So it's basically Najee and a wide receiver running back hybrid, Cordero Patterson, in the backfield for the Steelers, meaning that Najee will likely get close to 20 carries in this game as long as it remains close. The total is about 40 in the game. The Colts are slightly favored, but the Colts have been the worst team overall, and many people are picking the Steelers to win this game. So I would consider this to be a 1-score contest. The game should remain pretty neutral in game script. So I see Najee Harris definitely flirting with 66.5. This might actually be his best matchup so far this season in terms of a running defense that he's facing, and he's already done this twice on the road this season. So it appears to be a pretty good bet. It's minus 120. Check that one out. Najee Harris is our first player prop pick of week number 4. Next, we're going to stay in the same game with our second player prop pick. That is Alec Pierce. Alec Pierce has been a player that's floated right under that radar. And I like Alec Pierce going over 24.5 receiving yards. He's done this in 5 of his last 6 overall games, right? The trend for Najee was on the road. For Alec Pierce, this is just overall games. And the last 3 games he's played, he's gone over 24.5 receiving yards. And the last 3 games he played were all this season, right? With Anthony Richardson at quarterback, that's why it's important. So you look at 125 at home against the Texans, and then on the road at the Packers, he had 56 yards. And then last week, he had 44 yards. So he has gone well above this 24.5 number 3 weeks in a row. I mean, he had 100 yards more in week 1, And then he had 56 and 44. Why I like this from a schematical and matchup standpoint is that the Steelers really have one good cornerback, and that is Joey Porter Jr. Joey Porter Jr. is likely going to be covering Michael Pittman a majority of the plays. And one of the bigger weaknesses on the Steelers is their number 2 or their slot corners, right? So if Pierce is primarily playing on the outside, maybe Porter's covering him for half those snaps, but there's a likeliness that Porter will be covering Pittman on big downs, which means that Pierce could go over this number, maybe even on one reception. He is a downfield target, right? So 5 of the last 6 games, he's averaged about 52 yards in those games. I think that's a solid pick. Pierce has just been underrated overall. And also, odds aren't bad at -120. So Pierce, and then also you could look at, he's exceeded 24.5 rush plus receiving yards in 5 of his last 6 games. That's at -117. So it depends on where you want to bet this and which bet you want to take. But, if you're getting the same price on rush plus receiving yards, it might not be a bad idea to take that over the receiving yards, right? So that's the same game. We're going to transfer to our next game, which is the Vikings and the Green Bay Packers. And if we're looking at an Aaron Jones revenge spot, might as well bet on Aaron Jones, right? Aaron Jones has looked real good. He's looked like Aaron Jones this season. There's no reason not to bet on him. So over 59.5 rushing yards is definitely a trend for Aaron Jones. 7 of the last 8 games he's played, including with the Packers and the Vikings, he has gone over this. Now, in week number 2, he failed to go over this number. Chandler actually was the leading rusher for the Minnesota Vikings against the San Francisco 49ers. He only had 32 rushing yards in that game. But in the other games that the Vikings have played, including one on the road against the Giants, he had 94 yards. And then the game against the Texans, he had 102 yards. Given that this game is in Green Bay, it's against his former team, I think that Aaron Jones is going to get all the opportunity in the world. Plus, we actually saw Aaron Jones get more work last week than we did the week before against the 49ers. I mean, it was pretty split with Chandler and him in week number 2. But in week number 3, Jones actually saw way more work than Chandler. So that's pretty interesting. But yeah, it's actually a great price at -106. And over 59.5 is the number that you've got to hit. I like this bet, honestly. So it should be a close game. It should be a 1-score game. I actually slightly lean towards the Packers to take the game at home, but I don't really think it's going to be a blowout in either direction. If anything, we've seen the Vikings surprisingly blow out teams this season, but this game isn't in Minnesota, which gives that less likeliness. But the fact that it's in an NFC North matchup probably means it's going to be really close. And the way that the Packers have been conceding yards and points, I would lean towards their run defense being weaker than their pass defense overall. The fact that Sam Darnold is on the road for this one, not in the comfort of a dome, O'Connell might lean on the run game, especially early, to have Sam Darnold calm down and be comfortable in this game so that they just, ease their way into this contest on the road against the Packers in a hostile environment and a tough place to play. So Aaron Jones going back home over 59.5 yards. Next up, we're going to go with some Kyle Pitts action. Okay, so the Atlanta Falcons game, we've got 2 picks for this one. I like Kyle Pitts under against the Saints, but I especially like the under 3.5 receptions at -140 on FanDuel. Kyle Pitts has failed to exceed 3.5 receptions in 8 straight games, and he averages 2.5 catches in those games. I also looked up Pitts' numbers against the Saints in particular in his matchup history against the Saints, and he has never had more than 3 catches in a game against the Saints. So this feels like as close to a lock as you could potentially get. You could also look at the under receiving yards, which is a little bit better odds at -110, but there's a reason for it. It's only happened in 4 of the last 5 games as opposed to 8 straight games, which feels like a lock, right? So Pitts, he's had 2, 3, 3, 2, 1, 3, 3, 3. So he pretty much gets 3 catches a game, but never 4. And that's what we've been seeing, right? Even in games where they were trailing against the Eagles, he only had 3. Against the Chiefs, he only had 2. And the Chiefs were really bad against tight ends before that. So, they locked up Pitts. So I feel like this is a game the Falcons will be running the football, and therefore that also combines with our next bet in this video, which is Kirk Cousins going under his pass attempts. I think we also bet this one last week, and it was successful. So the trend will continue on the bottom line view to take Kirk Cousins under his pass attempts. 32.5, 31.5, depends what you get. But Cousins, minus 114, under 31.5. He has hit 29 attempts in his past 2 games. Again, 2 games that he was pretty much trailing against the Chiefs and especially against the Eagles. Only got to 29 attempts. And then against the Steelers, he only had 26 attempts against the Steelers. And like I said, I think the Saints are a better pass defense than they are a run defense. I think the Falcons will focus on running the football. And unless they get way behind, which I don't think is going to happen at home, I don't think that's going to happen given the offensive line injuries the Saints have. I don't think they're going to be trailing by a whole bunch, the Falcons in this game. But we've even seen when they're trailing, he still hasn't attempted 32 attempts yet. So, maybe they're more comfortable with him as he continues to get healthier and he shows that he's confident in the pocket and stuff like that. But I don't think the way that you attack the Saints is by having a high volume amount of attempts. I think you need to stay honest. I think you need to be balanced. I think you need to run the ball. When you look at Kirk Cousins, that's how he feeds, right? That's what he does, right? He's a run-heavy, play-action quarterback a majority of the time. And Cousins, he's failed to exceed 31.5 pass attempts in 5 of his last 6 games. This is dating back to his Vikings days. There was just one huge outlier, which was him going 45 attempts against the 49ers on Monday Night Football last year in Minnesota. Totally different offense, totally different, environment overall, right? And totally different opponent. So, yeah, even with the Vikings, like against the Packers, he had 31. Against Chicago, he had 31. So he doesn't do this very often. So I would take the under 31.5 on Kirk Cousins once again in week number 4. Now we're going to transfer to our next game, which is the Texans and the Jags. I like Stephon Diggs to go under his longest reception at minus 115, under 22.5. This has been a huge trend for Diggs, given the way and the style at which he plays in Houston and dating back to last season with the Bills. Diggs has become an underneath and intermediate receiver that rarely takes the top off a defense. And unless there is a coverage bust, I don't think Diggs is going to be able to hit this number this week, right? We've seen his longest reception fail in 8 straight games at home. This is 100% in the last 8 games. 21 against Chicago on Sunday night, which was close, but not quite. 15, 12, 11, 18, 11, 14, 17. So the downfield threat for the Texans is Nico Collins. The underneath receiver has been Stephon Diggs, and even his longest reception with the Texans so far has only been 21 yards. So yes, Tank Dell is out. That does kind of hurt our cause, but this is pretty good odds for an 8 straight home, trend. So Stephon Diggs, I think the Texans are going to throw the ball against the Jags. It's man coverage oriented with Jacksonville, which does scare you maybe a little bit if like a guy falls down or something. But overall, I think Diggs is primarily going to be the guy that's in the slot working the underneath portions of the field, while I feel like Nico Collins could be the guy that breaks down the field for a big play. So Diggs under his longest reception. Next, we have Dalton Schultz going under 3.5 receptions. This is kind of like a matchup thing, but also a trend thing. So Schultz has failed to exceed 3.5 receptions in 5 of his last 6 games at home. The one outlier was against Cleveland in the regular season last year, where he had 8 catches. Now he's had 2 catches, 1 catch, 2 catches, 1 catch, 2 catches. He hasn't even really come close, right? And that was back last year when they were without Tank Dell. They didn't have Stephon Diggs. I just think the Texans have so many different options to throw the ball to. And when you think about Jacksonville, you think about a defense that does play a lot of man coverage. And given that they play a lot of man coverage, Dalton Schultz is not the best at beating man coverage. He's not the most athletic. He's not the quickest. He's not the fastest. He's a zone beater, right? He's a find the comfort in the zone coverage, catch the football for a few yards, get the chains going, right? Like move the chains or just get that drive going. And I just don't think he has that separation ability. Maybe he catches 2 checkdowns. Maybe he catches 3 passes because Tank Dell's out and they need another receiver to step up. But I think in this matchup in particular, it's going to be a big Nico Collins game. I think Diggs will have a lot of targets and a lot of receptions, but not for a ton of yards, right? So I would look Schultz under 3.5. This just seems to be pretty consistent. He's not getting a ton of volume in this offense currently. The Chicago game, I like Santos to go over 1.5 field goals, minus 119. He has exceeded 1.5 field goals in 5 straight games at home as the Bears kicker. This is 100% in the last 5 games. He hit 3 field goals in week 1 against Tennessee in a game in which Chicago barely even moved the ball. And this is a game against the Rams where I expect them to move the ball. I actually like what I saw from Chicago in terms of their offense last week in the passing game against the Colts. I think that they're going to continue to improve with young Caleb Williams at the helm. They're at home in this game. I do think the Rams will move the ball a bit, which will force the Bears to be more aggressive in terms of moving the ball. And I also think because they have a rookie quarterback and because the Rams are a bend but don't break defense, that the Rams will be able to shut down and slow down and stifle the Bears' attack in the red zone, but then forcing Santos to come out for a field goal. So this was probably one of my more favorite picks at minus 119 over field goals for Santos. Pretty simple there. DeAndre Swift, I like to go under 34.5 rushing yards. First of all, he sucks. Second of all, he could be losing his job to Roschon Johnson or Khalil Herbert, or it'll be a 3, back committee system this week. The Rams are not that bad against running backs and or the run in general. They only allowed 77 rushing yards overall to Jordan Mason last week, and the Niners were in the lead for a majority of that game. And that's the only game that Mason did not go over his rushing total. So actually, the Rams are kind of deceptively good up front and deceptively good against the run, but 20 yards, 18 yards, 30 yards, 34 yards, 4 of the last 5 games. And the last time he did it was the 5th game, right? And that was with Philadelphia. When you look at what he's done with Chicago, Tennessee, 30 yards, Houston, 18 yards, Indy, 20 yards. The Bears can't run the ball. Their O-line stinks, and Swift is not a very good player, and they're lacking that trust with him now. After 3 games of him being very inefficient, they're looking to move off of him and give more carries to other backs. So this is a great pick at minus 110, under 34.5 for Swift. And then we're going to look at Matthew Stafford. There's a lot of different trends here, which is why I have the full page up for Matthew Stafford. But I like especially his passing yards going over. And I also don't mind completions or attempts. But when you look at his passing yards, the reason it's interesting is because Stafford has actually exceeded this total in 10 straight games, and it's at minus 110. So yes, the Bears are a good pass defense, but Stafford has gone over 214 yards in 10 straight games, including a game against Arizona in which they lost 41-10 and he was pulled early in the game. So this might be one of the best bets in terms of trends of the entire week. The Rams are going to throw the ball, and the Rams are going to throw the ball with volume. So if you want to go with Stafford, 214.5 yards, 10 straight games. He averages 282.6 passing yards a game. And you could also maybe combine that with exceeding his passing attempts 8 of the last 10 games, which is 80%, which, the higher the number gets, the stronger that percentage is. This is also plus money at plus 108 on FanDuel. So if you want to bet maybe Stafford over attempts and Stafford over passing yards in just 2 straight bets, you're bound to win at least one of those, especially because one of them is plus 108. That's actually makes it even better to win some money on that. So yeah, I feel like Stafford, they're going to move the ball. I mean, the Rams are going to move the ball on most teams. And if the Bears play better offense than people expect and the Rams are trailing, that just means more attempts and more passing yards, right? So Stafford, I like in any game. I like to bet on Stafford. He's a great player. And that trend of 10 straight games over 214 yards is pretty crazy. So I would definitely look at that one. Kyren Williams to score a touchdown. If there's anybody that you would expect to score a touchdown this week, I think Kyren Williams ranks near the top of the list. This is at minus 101, which still is a pretty good price considering what we saw from Christian McCaffrey last year where he was scoring 2 touchdowns a game, and they basically made it unbettable. But Kyron's become that player this year where he scored 1 touchdown against Detroit, 1 touchdown against Arizona, 2 touchdowns against the Niners. And it's very likely that he scores another touchdown because Cooper Kupp's not playing, Puka Nakua's not playing. The guy that they're going to go to in the red zone is their most trustworthy player, which is Kyren Williams. Whether it be a screen, a dump off, or just a run play, they're going to get it to Kyren Williams in one way, shape, or form. So the most likely player to score for the Rams, which they should score a touchdown against the Bears, as good as the Bears defense is, they should score a touchdown. It is Kyren Williams. He has exceeded a half rushing touchdown in 6 of the last 7 games. And that's 1.3 rushing touchdowns per game. And he had 2 rushing touchdowns against the 49ers, 3 rushing touchdowns way back against the Giants. The only time he hasn't done this is in the playoffs against Detroit, right? And Detroit had a very good run defense. But he did do it against Detroit this year. So there you go. Now we're going to move to the Bengals and Joe Burrow. I like Burrow to go over 1.5 passing touchdowns at -137. This is 3 touchdowns against Washington, 2 touchdowns against Kansas City. He didn't have any against the Patriots, but I think we've seen a progression from the offense. T. Higgins is back. Jamar Chase is there. The Panthers are a terrible defense, and it looks like the Bengals are willing to throw the ball inside the 5-yard line, inside the 10-yard line. If you watch that game, I mean, they like to throw the ball with Joe Burrow in the red zone because he's very accurate. He's very precise. They've got 2 monsters and even 3 monsters in Yossi Vosh that can go up and win contested catches and be difficult matchups. Even Mike Gesicki in the red zone individually, like these guys are very difficult to cover in that jump ball contested catch space. And the Panthers secondary, very thin, not very good. They're not a very good defense in general, which means the Bengals will move the ball and get into many positions to score in this game. It's likely to be a higher scoring game. So I think the Bengals definitely put up 2 passing touchdowns in this game, rather from deep out with Jamar Chase going for deep yards, or even in the red zone when they get closer, they're willing to throw it, given that they're not really trustworthy running backs in Brown and Zach Moss. And on the other side in Carolina, I like Chuba Hubbard over 59.5 rushing yards. He has gone over this in 4 of his last 5 games against bottom 10 defenses for rushing yards allowed, which certainly the Bengals are. They're not very good at allowing rushing yards. So he's gone over against the Raiders, 114 rushing yards, 83 rushing yards against Tampa last year, 87 against the Falcons, 104 against Tampa last year as well. So with Andy Dalton as the quarterback now, this just makes the offense in Carolina a lot more productive. I think a lot of people will be looking at playing the passing overs and things like that thanks to Andy Dalton. But Adam Thielen's now out. I would say that one of the ways Carolina can win this game, especially at home, is by keeping Burrow on the sidelines, running the ball, controlling the clock, milking the clock. And the best way to do that is by handing the ball to Hubbard and letting him work against a run defense that's struggled all year long and is missing their top 2 defensive tackles. So this is a really good pick at -105. We've got the Tampa Bay game against Philadelphia. Baker Mayfield going over 21.5 pass completions. This is hitting at 100% in his last 5 games at home. 21.5 over. This is -114. Now, this includes playing the Eagles in the playoffs, in which Baker had 22 completions, a half completion over against Philly. But that was also in a game in which they were up big for a large portion of the game. And this very well could be the opposite, where Baker could be trailing in this game. So that means more attempts, perhaps more completions. But if the Bucs are going to win, I also expect them to throw the ball, because the Eagles looked really good against the run last week against the Saints, and they have matchups, Tampa. Godwin, Evans, against the secondary of the Eagles. The primary way to attack the Eagles is through the air, in my opinion. So I think Baker should have 22 completions in this game, whether it's from ahead or behind, or if it's a shootout, even better. Then we have Chase McLaughlin, who has exceeded 1.5 field goals in 6 straight games versus bottom 10 defenses for field goals allowed, which is right now the Eagles, 100% in his last 6 straight games. If you watch the Eagles too, they were very good last week at not allowing the Saints to score touchdowns, forcing field goals, right? Chase McLaughlin, 3 field goals against the Eagles in the playoffs last year. So that shows that he did this against the team last year. And then 3 field goals against Jacksonville last year. But I like the Bucs to be able to move the ball and get in range, but with Vic Fangio on the other side, Jalen Carter rushing the quarterback, there is a chance that on 3rd downs they get stopped and they're forced to kick some field goals. So Chase McLaughlin over 1.5 field goals made. Now we're going to switch to the afternoon with 4 favorite picks for the afternoon. Jacoby Brissett, just in general, take the under on Jacoby Brissett, whether it be other than interceptions, which he has failed to go over half an interception in 5 straight games. So don't fade him on the interception front. But passing attempts, 4 of the last 5 games, he's gone under 25.5 passing attempts, and his average is 18.4. So that's very interesting. When you look at, 27 attempts against Seattle, but otherwise 24 against the Bengals, 18 against the Jets, that's probably not my favorite of the group, but that is an option. I would say that my favorite is probably anything yards related. I don't expect New England to be able to throw the ball against the Niners. They will want to run the ball. So under 157.5 passing yards or under 170.5 total yards makes sense to me. So Brissett has gone under this number 3 games with the Patriots, 121 passing yards against a bad Bengals defense, 149 yards against Seattle at home, and then 98 yards on the road against the Jets. In the 2 games on the road, they haven't even exceeded 125 passing yards. So 157.5 seems high, especially when you consider that if the Niners are blowing out the Patriots as 10.5 point favorites, Drake May might enter this game in the 3rd quarter. Like that's very likely. So I would take the under on Brissett completions, yards, whatever it may be. Then we have Jordan Mason. I would trend towards the opposite direction. I would take the over rushing yards at 78.5. Now this trend, right? They're telling us to go under, and the reason for that is that Jordan Mason was a backup all last year, so his numbers show that he is not very good at going over this number, obviously, right? But this year, he's gone over the number in 2 of the 3 games, and the only time he didn't was against the Rams, and he was 2 yards off of going over 78.5. I would say that against New England, people think New England has a great run defense. I don't necessarily think New England is a great run defense. I think especially without Jawan Bentley, and we knew that Christian Barmore would be out, they're not nearly as good of a run defense as last year. On top of that, they have typically struggled with Kyle Shanahan rushing attacks. Dating all the way back to the Denver Broncos with Mike Shanahan, I've witnessed the Shanahans run against the Patriots in my history of watching the Patriots. I'm a Patriots fan, obviously. So Jordan Mason, I think, will have close to 100 yards in this game. I think he'll get 20 carries in this game. The Niners will be up. They'll be in control. I think they'll run the ball, and I think Mason will have a huge game. I definitely think he'll have a huge game, and I think that in the 4th quarter, 3rd quarter, they're grinding out clock. I think Mason's going to be the guy getting the ball. So I would go over 78.5 for Mason at -110. And Brian Robinson, this is an interesting one that I didn't think really was the case, but Robinson has failed to exceed 15.5 as his longest rush in 8 straight games on the road. 15, 9, 6, 9, 15, 14, 7, 7. So 15.5. He's never gotten to 16 on this number. He's playing a Cardinals run defense that's actually pretty good. The Cardinals run defense is actually, I think they're 20th in yards, but I think they're like top 9 or 10 in yards per attempt, which is really what we're talking about here. So I think Robinson's played well, but I could see the Cardinals stopping the run better against the Commanders than the Bengals did for sure. And just given that Robinson isn't the fastest, most explosive, most electric running back in the league, he could definitely fall under this number. And then to finish it off, we have Justin Watson at -140 going under 1.5 receptions. This has been a trend. He has failed to exceed 1.5 catches in 7 straight games on the road. 1, 1, 0, 0, 1, 0, 1. And he's basically like a role player. Like he barely gets on the field, only in run snaps, blocking snaps. They usually throw him the ball 1 time a game on like a quick outlet or something. So this feels like a good lock to add to a parlay. Watson under 1.5 because they've involved Juju more. You've got Worthy, you've got Rashee Rice, Travis Kelce, Gray gets touches. Watson's unlikely to catch 2 passes in any game. And if he does, it's probably not a good thing for the Chiefs. So those are my player prop picks this week, guys. I think that this is a pretty stacked slate for the early and afternoon games. If you want my picks for Sunday Night Football and you want my picks for Monday Night Football in terms of props, we actually went 3-0 on Thursday night. So if you want my picks for prime time, then just sign up to Patreon. Link in the description. You'll get all of my bets this weekend, week 4, and for the rest of the season. on Patreon. It's $10 a month if you want to support me and see what I'm betting each and every week, including my props. Mostly on primetime games, I'm providing props because sometimes I don't like the spread or the total, so I'm more likely to give out picks on props during those games because it just makes more sense. I want to give out picks. I want to give out something to bet on during the biggest games of the week, but sometimes it's just not advantageous to bet the spread or the total, so I give out props. So if you want to see those, it's on Patreon. Thanks, guys, for watching. Gronk spike the like button. Don't forget to subscribe, and good luck on your bets. Deuces.